Beneath the heavy, suffocating fog that polluted the streets of Victorian England, a chilling entity tormented young women as they walked home. Was the devil himself stalking the streets of London? Or could the stories of a violent yet ultimately human criminal have been contorted into the makings of an urban legend, his infamy perpetuated by the macabre fascinations that had gripped popular culture in the 19th century? Whoever or whatever he was, his vicious attacks left some witnesses in fits of hysteria, and his habit of evading capture by jumping across rooftops earned him a most unnerving moniker. Tonight, we recount the legend of Springheeledjack. Thank you for joining us for another gathering of the Midnight Quarter. Our story will begin when the clock strikes midnight. In order to recognize how the story of Springheeledjack gained such notoriety, we must first understand the environment that allowed such frightening notions to fester and spread. The Victorian era refers to the 63-year reign of Queen Victoria, spanning from 1837 until her death in 1901. Life in the Victorian era was, from a modern perspective, nothing short of dreadful. The living conditions for much of the population were dire, with dark, dank and cramped homes infested with lice and vermin being the norm for many. Poor sanitation, combined with increasingly crowded dwellings, made for a breeding ground of disease, particularly in densely populated areas. It's no wonder then that the life expectancy was relatively low, and death amongst younger people was, unfortunately, far from unheard of. With this abundance of misfortune came a fascination with all things grim and ghostly. After all, life and death were so closely intertwined that the topic could not be avoided. In time, however, this preoccupation with the morbid became an almost fanatical obsession. Seances were performed regularly, from private affairs conducted in the homes of grieving families, to theatrical feats performed on stage to the thrilling cheers of rowdy audiences. Smaller gatherings often made attempts to contact deceased loved ones via means of automatic writing, a practice also known as psychography, in which a participant would allow their hands to be controlled by the spirits in order to produce written communication. For the larger performances, mediums would travel from town to town, delivering larger-than-life acts of showmanship to eager crowds in venues across the country. Whilst potentially seen as unusual when viewed through the contemporary lens, much of these behaviours were simply those of people in mourning, seeking solace in the midst of grief. The same cannot be said, however, for some of the other, more gruesome indulgences enjoyed by those in the 19th century. Perhaps the most awful of all being that of public surgery. Though rather contrarian, the Victorians were simultaneously intrigued by the notion of spiritualism and by the advancement of scientific discovery. Because of this, surgery was often considered a public affair, with crowds gathering to watch the surgeon at work. Whether they came out of pure academic interest, or simply to revel in the screams of those unlucky enough to find themselves on the surgeon's table, the attraction of bystanders to such events is even more disturbing when it is considered that during the early 1800s, the use of anesthesia was unheard of, and therefore patients were awake and very much aware during procedures. Not content with watching live surgical procedures, the Victorian era also saw a rise in the popularity of unwrapping parties, wherein groups of high society revelers would gather for drinks, fine dining, and, unbelievably, to partake in the slow unwrapping of ancient Egyptian mummies. These precious remains were destroyed and discarded in obscene numbers out of pure hedonistic curiosity. Thus was the mindset of many who lived in the Victorian era, and even these few short examples set the stage for how stories such as Jack's ran amok in the imaginations of the populace. One night in October of 1837, a young woman by the name of Mary Stevens was walking home alone through Clapham Common. As she passed by a dark alleyway, Mary was attacked by a stranger who began to tear at her clothing with what appeared to be claws made from sharp metal. The man was described as being tall, thin, and unnaturally cold, like a corpse, with a pointed chin and eyes like balls of fire. His attack was disrupted when the woman's screams alerted passers-by, and it's claimed that he escaped, remarkably, by leaping over a tall fence before disappearing into the night. The following day, a man matching this description was seen close to where the attack on Mary had occurred. He reportedly leapt out in front of a carriage, causing it to swerve and crash, resulting in severe injury to the driver. The man then escaped by leaping effortlessly over a 9-foot wall, letting out a high-pitched, maniacal laugh as he did so. This early encounter of the man, later dubbed Springheeledjack, was one of many similar and equally disturbing tales. In February of 1838, a woman named Jane Alsop was met with a stranger after hearing a frantic rapping upon her front door. The man initially introduced himself as a policeman and claimed that he had captured Jack in a nearby lane. He demanded that Jane return with a lantern, but upon doing so, Jane realized that the stranger on her doorstep was the elusive menace himself. The man reportedly let out an awful cackle before spitting blue flames at the petrified woman. Alerted by the commotion, Jane's sister pulled her back inside the house. Jane later told the authorities that the man who matched the description given earlier by Mary Stevens had torn ferociously at her hair and clothing with metallic claws. A man named Thomas Milbank was later arrested on suspicion of being Jack. In the aftermath of the attack on Jane, hunters at the Morgan Arms public house overheard Milbank bragging about his supposed exploits. He was, however, acquitted at trial due to Jane's insistence that her assailant had been able to spit blue flames, an ability that Milbank, naturally, could not recreate. Not long after the attack on Jane Alsop, two sisters named Lucy and Margaret Scales were walking home late one evening when they came across a strange man leaning against the wall. It was said that as they approached him, the man leapt out at Lucy, breathing blue flames into her eyes, and according to some reports, leaving her blind and seizing. Some witnesses to the attack claim to have seen Jack take a standing jump from the alleyway onto the roof of a nearby house, before quickly disappearing from sight. Margaret, however, instead remembered the man calmly walking away. Over the years, sightings of this devilish fiend continued, and the rumours surrounding Jack ran wild, from claims of a monstrous figure with horns and a tail seen leaping over the heads of policemen, to reports of a strange man dancing in the moonlight across the Kensington Palace gardens. Jack's image soon became a regular depiction in media such as the Penny Dreadfuls, a popular form of cheaply manufactured serial literature that were produced and sold in the 19th century. As the name suggests, the booklets could be purchased for a penny and featured fictional crime, supernatural, and mystery stories published in weekly parts. Jack became a recurring character in these stories, in which he was termed the Terror of London, which only fed into the superstition surrounding him. The story of Jack quickly gained traction, and he became somewhat of a catch-all boogeyman for all things bizarre, violent, or downright strange. He was even linked, albeit tenuously, to the Whitechapel murders, a string of atrocities committed by the notorious serial killer, Jack the Ripper. The name was first used in letters sent by the killer himself, or, at least, by somebody pretending to be him. In September of 1888, the Central News Agency of London received the first, now infamous, Dear Boss letter, in which the author mocked the efforts being made to detain him and bragged of the bloodshed by his hand. Signed, "Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper." This correspondence gave the still unidentified brute a name which, as some believe, could have been inspired by the roof-hopping, flame-breathing trickster himself. This was an arguably deliberate continuation and escalation of the lore surrounding Spring-heeled Jack, one that was readily welcomed by a populace well primed to buy into such an association. Not one to be tethered by geography, Spring-heeled Jack was also linked to a phenomenon since referred to as the Devil's Footprints of Devon. On the morning of February the 9th, 1855, residents in the south of Devon awoke after a night of heavy snowfall to find an unusual and unnerving sight. A trail of cloven, hoof-like footprints could be seen in the snow, and, intriguingly, the maker of these footprints had been seemingly unobstructed as they walked. The single-file prints, which travelled an estimated distance of between 60 and 160 kilometres, had traversed walls, rivers and fields, with footprints even being found on rooftops and across gardens enclosed by tall walls. Whilst Jack's name has been loosely associated with this bizarre incident, it remains unsolved to this day. Interestingly, this was not the first time Jack was associated with events taking place in Devon. In 1847, Captain Finch of Tynemouth was charged with 2 separate attacks on women, during which he wore a mask with horns in an apparent attempt to frame Jack for his crimes. The more traditional sightings of Jack were also not confined to the capital, and in 1888 he seemingly headed to the northwest of England, where he is said to have been spotted on the roof of St Francis Xavier's Church in Everton, Liverpool. Witnesses described seeing a man bounding across the roof and scaling the steeple before disappearing over a row of houses. Those sightings dwindled significantly after this. He has been spotted even as recently as the 21st century. On the night of Valentine's Day 2012, a man named Scott Martin was travelling home with his family. The group had taken a taxi from Stoneleigh, Warwickshire, back to Banstead, Surrey, and were making their way along the Ewell bypass when they spotted a man acting strangely by the side of the road. Suddenly, the man, who they described as being a dark figure with no discernible features, darted across the dual carriageway before disappearing over a 15-foot tall roadside bank in a matter of seconds. The legend of Jack has bewitched the imaginations of many over the decades. The notion of a devilish creature stalking the streets is certainly an evocative image. However, the theories surrounding his identity are varied and potentially much more grounded in reality. One of the more popular theories is that the actions of Spring-heeled Jack were nothing more than the follies of a nobleman by the name of Henry Delapour Beresford. Beresford was the 3rd Marquess of Waterford and had a reputation for being eccentric and often reckless and destructive. In fact, Beresford is even touted as a conceivable inspiration for the phrase "paint the town red," due to one particularly riotous incident. In the early morning hours of April 6th, 1837, Beresford, along with his fox hunting party, arrived at the toll gate of Melton Mowbray, a small town in the Melton district of Leicestershire. Unfortunately for the tollgate operator, the men, exceedingly rowdy after a day of drinking and gambling, spotted ladders, tools, and buckets of red paint that had been left behind by workmen repairing damage to the gatehouse. The group, sensing an opportunity to misbehave, proceeded to douse the toll booth and its operator with red paint, before heading into town where they, quite literally, painted the town red. Walls, windows, and even the sign of the White Swan pub were painted, and intervening officers were assaulted by the raucous gang, who continued their rampage by smashing windows, trampling gardens, and generally enjoying their spree of drunken debauchery. It was antics such as these, alongside his penchant for boisterous pranks, that often veered into cruel territory, that earned Beresford the nickname of the Mad Marquis, and many at the time believed that he, along with his aristocratic companions, could have been behind the phenomenon that was Jack. It has been speculated that Beresford used his money and connections to procure a one-of-a-kind contraption that, upon being fastened to his shoes, would give him his spring-heeled abilities. He is also rumoured to have learned fire-breathing techniques, which only furthered the seemingly supernatural qualities of the trickster. Whilst a strong contender for the identity of Jack, and certainly a possible originator of the facade, sightings of Jack continued long after Beresford's death in 1859. Therefore, he cannot be accredited with the entirety of the incidents attributed to the terror of London. Rumours at the time also spread of a society of upper-class individuals who, bored and with the means to do as they pleased, assumed the ensemble as a collective intent on causing havoc amongst the lower classes. The more sinister versions of this narrative even include a bet, wherein the member responsible for the highest number of deaths would secure a large sum of money. So, was Jack a man, a beast, or the devil himself? Was he a guise worn by many, a twisted order of high society tricksters set out to terrorize the public, or simply a fictional figurehead adopted by a series of common pranksters? Could Jack truly have been as wretched as the stories would have us believe? Or were the tales of his monstrous pursuits exacerbated by societal frenzy, encouraged by eyewitness embellishments and outright fabrications? The truth we may never know, but one thing is for certain. The legend of Jack lingers, even today, and his name once struck ice-cold terror into the hearts of those who feared they may be unlucky enough to cross his path on a dark, bitter London evening. Thank you for joining us for another gathering of the Midnight Quarter. We'll see you again when the clock strikes midnight.